I'm Rebecca, and this is my Math Resource Kit presentation. So the grades and topics I covered in my resource kit are Grade 1, Patterns and Relations, Grade 1, Shape and Space, Grade 2, Patterns and Relations, Grade 2, Shape and Space, and Grade 3, Patterns and Relations. And all of these came from outcomes in the Saskatchewan curriculum. So my rationale for this resource kit. So I believe that all children do have the ability to learn math. The children that are struggling to understand strategies or express that they understand those strategies aren't given the tools that they need to succeed in their learning. It is often the case that they need a lot more hands-on materials because they are more kinesthetic learners, and they struggle to visualize those math processes that they are learning in their head. They need something that they can see in front of them and that they can physically manipulate to understand those concepts. So by providing manipulatives that students can use to physically work through problems, they're able to see those math processes in front of them, and then they're able to better understand them. So my outline for my resource kit. In the classroom, each student card and paper materials or small materials for the resource will be stored in a Ziploc bag in an accessible spot for the students. Any larger materials such as pattern blocks or big shapes will be stored near the Ziploc bags, either in bins or however they were originally stored, and it'll be near the Ziploc bags that contain the appropriate teacher cards, student cards, and paper materials, if that's required, that will match up with those bigger materials. Materials will also be coded by color, so they will have a sticker or a colored circle to indicate what materials go with which card, just in case resources may get lost or misplaced. Students can understand that if it has a yellow dot on it, then it goes with the student card that has the yellow dot on it. This is my teacher card for Resource 1. On it, we see that the name of our activity is Create a Pattern. This activity I actually got from Pinterest, and I modified it to suit my needs. So the materials for this resource I chose to be gems, rocks, beads, and shells. Those are the different materials that I wanted to use for this activity. And this is how they're going to be set up in the classroom. So it's a tray with all the materials in it and a sign that says Create a Pattern. This prompts students to create whatever pattern they like. So the description of this activity. This activity is an open invitation for students to create their own patterns using manipulatives so they can explore the materials however they choose and create a pattern using the materials. So an example they could create is they could create examples like this and then continue the pattern however they choose. Like this. So then this is our student card. It has language that's very appropriate for students that are grade 1. And this activity, I believe, is very engaging for grade 1 students because they have the freedom to create whatever pattern they want. They can explore the materials, and they can create whatever pattern they would like. And after they create their pattern, they go and ask their teacher to look at their pattern and possibly even take a picture of it if it needed to be done for assessment. This activity promotes deeper thinking for students because they need to look at the materials and assess them, and then think about how they can use these materials to represent a pattern of some sort. This is a very good intro to the concept of patterns for young students because they can see that you can use any type of material they would like to create a pattern. They could even take this concept home, find materials around their house, and then start creating patterns in their free time. My second activity in my resource kit is called What Comes Next. So this activity has a blue dot, which means all of the corresponding materials will have a blue mark somewhere on them. So this activity I also found inspiration from on Pinterest, finding these prompt cards. I made these prompt cards myself, but the inspiration for them did come from Pinterest. So the description for this activity is that students will be able to pick from any of these prompt cards, and then after picking the card, they will have to look at the card and assess the pattern that is in the card. They will then have to figure out what numbers come next in our pattern. Also, when the students find the numbers, they can also write it in these spaces on this prompt card. So for example, our first card has the pattern 2, 4, 6, 8. So this is a pattern of going up by 2. So the next numbers in our pattern is 10 and then 12. So this activity engages students to pick a card from these prompt cards that they want to solve. So they can flip through and they can choose a card that's more challenging for them or a card that's easier for them. For higher thinking in this resource, students need to figure out what pattern is present on each card in order to figure out the next numbers. So they need to think about all the different patterns that could be in this card and depict which one is on this card. So this card goes up by 4s, and they need to know that pattern in order to figure out the next 2 numbers. Accommodations for this activity is that instead of writing if students can't represent their numbers, they are able to represent numbers in other ways, such as possibly playing cards or dots or visuals or however they need to. Also, students can work in partners if they're unable to solve problems on their own in order to have another student supporting them. My third activity in my resource kit is at a grade 3 level, and the activity is called 100 Charts Patterns. It's for a strand of patterns and relations. So the materials for this activity is 100 charts and pattern templates that are in my resource kit that I created myself, and I guess the pattern worksheet. This idea was inspired from something that I found online on Pinterest. So this activity involves a 100 chart and some pattern templates. So students will pick a pattern template and place it over top of the 100 chart. They'll look at what numbers they can see, and then they will have to assess what pattern that could be. They will then record their guess on the Guess the Pattern worksheet. So here's an example of the materials. Here I have a 100 chart and 2 example templates. So if I take a template and if I place it over top of the 100 chart, I can see the pattern that is coming through the holes in the template. So I see that this pattern is counting upwards by 2s. So that since I know that that's the pattern for template 2, I will go over to my What's the Pattern worksheet, and I'll fill in under template 2 that the pattern is going up by 2. With this activity, it again engages students to assess what patterns can be present in other places of math. It shows students that patterns are present in other areas of math and can prompt students to think about where else in their life they see patterns. I believe that this resource is engaging for students because they can constantly switch out the pattern templates to see the different patterns that can be in the 100 chart. This resource can then be extended to then have students identify on their own, without pattern templates, what patterns are in the 100 chart and what patterns they can identify on their own. This is my 4th resource in my resource package. So the activity name for this resource is Shape Create. This activity provides challenge cards for students, and they need to use pattern blocks to fill in the various shapes that are on these challenge cards. The materials for this resource are challenge cards, which are listed in my resource package, and there's also a link to them online. These challenge cards I got from my online teaching website, and the link is in the back of my resource package, and examples are in the middle of my resource package. You also need pattern blocks in order to fill in the various shapes. These are examples of different challenge cards for the students to try and fill in. This one is an example of an easier one, where the colors are already there and students just need to match the colors of the pattern blocks and the shape of the pattern block to the image. For this one, the students need to figure out what shapes on their own will fit into these triangles. So because there are different options for students to choose from, I believe that this activity is very engaging, as they can choose a more challenging card or an easier card depending on what level they are at. They can also choose to fill out these cards with other people, with maybe 1 or 2 friends, in order to help them along their way. Because this is for grade 1, the assessment for this is only visual, so after they create their shapes, they may get a teacher to come and look at them, but they also put all their tiles and cards back into their bags or in their bins. This is the next resource in my resource package. So this resource is called Object Compare. This resource uses multiple 3D shapes such as cubes, cones, spheres, cylinders, and pyramids. And students need to assess these shapes and then fill out what's called compare sheets. So the resources for this activity is pictures of 3D objects or the actual 3D objects themselves, and then compare sheets. So these are the compare sheets that I have. So students will look at the shape that they see in front of them, whether it's a cylinder, cube, whatever 3D shape it is, and they will fill in this card. So if I have a cube, I'll put in here, I am a cube. I have 6 sides, and then I will list however many corners it has and however edges it has. So students can do this by physically looking at the object and counting how many sides, corners, and edges that they have. These compare sheets help students to think more critically, and they can see and compare different shapes and different attributes of these different 3D shapes. I believe this activity is engaging for grade 2s because they can touch and feel and move around the shapes in their hands and look at all the different attributes of the shape in order to figure out what they need to put on their card and then compare it to other shapes. If students are struggling to figure out these 3D shapes, they can do it with a friend, and they can also use some type of maybe picture that labels the different attributes of a shape for them. So after they've done this activity, they give the cards to the teacher, and then the teacher can assess them using the cards to see if they understand the different attributes of different 3D shapes. Now this activity I did create on my own. I looked at the learning outcome that we had and found that a good way to compare the attributes of the different shapes was to use these compare cards and have the students look at the shapes in a physical form. These are the resources that I used in my resource kit. All of the resources for each resource are listed under the resource, and then I have image references for the images that I used in my student cards.